Hello everyone, my name is Tera Ekezie, and I'll be presenting to you on my disease, also known as the West Nile virus. Today I'll be covering all the aspects that include my disease, that include the vocabulary, the background, plus a visual picture that includes the transmission of how West Nile virus is transmitted, history and origin, causes and symptoms, experimental process, which includes the observation, results, and conclusions, the diagnostic techniques, treatment options, prevention, future research, references, acknowledgments, and then I'll open the floor to any questions, comments, and or constructive criticism. For my vocabulary, encephalitis, which should be a review, which means that it's a virus that causes inflammation to the brain. And then zoonotic is any disease that can be transmitted from an animal to a human. And then arbovirus is any group of disease or viruses that can be transmitted from mosquitoes, ticks, or any other arthropods. And then flavivirus is any virus in relation to mosquitoes. And then passiformes are the largest order of species of birds. That term was used in 1999. That would be mentioned in my experiment as we continue later on. And then pteroform birds are the diverse order of the smallest to medium-sized birds, also used in my experiment, which we'll get to later on. And then viremia is the viruses in the blood, and then ophthalmositis means to put to death in youth. Here is my background. So the West Nile virus is a disease that can be transferred to humans by mosquitoes. And then it can be found in temperate or tropical places in the world. And then a virus that carries the disease is known as encephalitis that usually causes the widespread. And then it's more prevalent in Africa because Africa has very hot climate and it has more deserts and it's closest to the equator. And then it can be also known as a mosquito-borne zoonotic disease or arbovirus. And then the disease also belongs to the family Flaviridae, which also includes malaria, West Nile fever, yellow fever, and any other mosquito-related disease. And then the West Nile virus usually spreads primarily in humans, birds, or horses, but it can also spread in other animals such as dogs and cats. And then here is a visual transmission of the disease. So birds and mosquitoes can usually trade off with the disease, and then usually mosquitoes would transfer the disease to humans or horses. And then we go into my history and origin. In 1937, the disease was discovered in Uganda, Africa, but it wasn't discovered by a person. It was actually found in an infectious person. It was a native woman from Uganda, Africa, that had the disease in her blood. And then from 1960s to 1990s, the disease started to spread in the Middle East, that included countries like Russia, India, Indonesia, and Israel. And then in 1999, it came to the Eastern Hemisphere, that included New York and in the United States. And then from 1999 to 2002, it spread throughout the United States and the rest of the Western Hemisphere, that included Africa, Europe, Asia, Australia, and the Middle East. And then here's a map to show the prevalence through the West Nile virus. So first it started in Africa, and it just covered up the whole continent. And then as time passed, it went through parts of Europe and Asia. Then it went southward to Australia, and then from 1999 it transferred to the Eastern Hemisphere, and it infected or usually spread through the United States and some parts of Canada and Mexico. And then causes and symptoms. And then one of the main causes to the West Nile virus is usually hot climates, because mosquitoes are usually found in hot weather. And then this includes symptoms like respiratory inflammation, which means they have a hard time breathing, headaches, nausea, endocrine disruption, which means your endocrine system is not properly functioning, fever, neck stiffness, tremors, which means they have hesitant movements often, convulsions, muscle weakness, vision loss, numbness, paralysis, encephalitis, disorientation, coma, and stupor, which means that you're unconscious or you have no sensibility. Now we'll move on to my experimental process. The experiment that I chose is called the Experimental Infection of North American Birds with the New York 1999 strain of the West Nile virus. And then the objective of the experiment was to see what types of birds were more commonly contracted to the West Nile virus. And then this ranged from the largest to smallest order of bird species in 1999. And they used it to see if they can infect the birds and see which ones would either weaken or survive. And then before the experiment, they made a hypothesis that the Passeriformes and charagiform birds such as the blue jays, common grackle, house finch, American crow, and house sparrow would pair faster than any other bird species, because in 1999 they were classified as the most populated species during that time, so mosquitoes would have an easier time to infect those types of birds. And then in the observation, after several days of collecting blood samples from the bird species and illnesses, deaths, and euthanasia occurred. And then exposed birds were monitored twice a day, and they gained several illnesses depending on the type of condition they were in. And then birds that didn't eat or drink were euthanized with carbon dioxide and then recorded their results. And then here's a chart of the last slide, except it's in graph form. So on the x-axis, you see the number of days that they were recorded. And then on the y-axis, you see the amount of this fluid known as wild PFD, or sexual milliliters of serum, that were reported. And then in the upper left-hand corner, you can see the types of birds that were tested. And if you can see from ranging from the days 0 to 7 or a week, you can see that the Passeriformes, which is this one, and the charagiform birds, which is the triangular shaped ones, were more affected by the fluid. And then this brings me to my results. And then in my results, out of 25 birds, only 17 families and 10 orders had the WNV, West Nile virus viremia. And then out of those 87 mosquito-infected birds, only 28 of them had illnesses and symptoms, and some pasturing birds. And then some of the illnesses were no stabilization, loss of head control, and ruffled feathers, which basically means that the feathers were falling off. And others that caused death within 24 hours, which is also equal to a day. And then this brings me to my conclusion. The conclusion of the experiment was to see what types of birds were usually contracted to the West Nile virus. And then it also causes damage, death, illnesses, and risk factors in many parts of the world. And then in certain bird species, such as Passeriformes and charagiform birds, were more likely to contract the West Nile virus because of the population that they had in 1999 in the USA. And then this brings me to my diagnosis. So for the diagnosis, it usually requires checking for any symptoms, and then if a doctor sees any symptoms or sees if the body should weaken, then they'll use serologic testing of the blood serum or cerebral fluid to restore strength and respiration. And then what serologic testing is basically testing to see the blood levels and seeing if the blood in your circulatory system is functioning properly. And they use it to restore and strengthen the circulatory system. And then the cerebrospinal fluid is just a fluid that goes between your brain and spinal cord. And then this brings me to my treatment options. Okay, unfortunately, there are no treatment options available. But if you want to treat your disease, then you should go to mandatory therapies, or you should get hospitalized, or if that doesn't work, then you should go into intensive nursing care. And then there's also no vaccines, so scientists are still working on that, and they'll develop that within the next few years. And then prevention. For preventing the West Nile virus, this usually requires avoiding mosquitoes by just spraying a minimum amount of pesticide spray, because pesticide spray has toxins and chemicals that might cause coughing, and it makes you hard to breathe. So they don't want too much pesticide spray so that it can contaminate your lungs. And then you should wear long sleeve clothing so you can protect your skin from mosquito bites. Then you should drain out unnecessary water, because during hot seasons, mosquitoes usually lay their eggs in water. And then you should protect the windows or doors that have access to the outside where mosquitoes are usually there. And then future research. The West Nile virus overall is a very bad disease, and it's spread throughout the world through many years. And then for future research, many scientists, doctors, and physicians thought that there's prevention towards the West Nile virus, then through medicine that includes an appropriate diagnosis, some more vaccines, and